sweet beeping machine.
It's 9 o'clock across the UK.
I mean, the count didn't finish until some ridiculous time. But listen, Nick, I prepared well for today's Phone Farage. I had a full 42 minutes in bed, which I don't think's too bad.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC. This is Phone Farage.
Here's your chance, take it.
Ukip leader Nigel Farage takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. This is Phone Farage with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Friday, the 5th of December. Good morning. This is Nigel Farage from Phone Farage. I will be taking your questions for the next half an hour or so. If you want to get involved, here is how you do it. Call me on 0345 6060 973 or email nigelfarage@lbc.co.uk. And don't forget, you can also watch Phone Farage on our website, lbc.co.uk. So let's head straight to the first caller, and it is Charles in Tottenham. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice
Hi.
to speak to you. Nigel, George Osborne had his autumn statement on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
If UKIP were in power, what would you do, and what sort of autumn statement will we hear from you?
Do you know what I would really like to hear from George Osborne or from Ed Balls, or I was going to say Nick Clegg, but he did a runner, didn't he? What I would really like to hear, just from somebody there, is a little bit of honesty. Because the brutal truth is this. After 13 years of Labour, after having to bail out the banks and Britain's public finances being in a ruinous mess, we'd managed to run our national debt up to just over £850 billion. It is now over £1.4 trillion. So for all the talk, I mean, quite how Osborne's got the front to stand in front of the House of Commons and to go on television and radio and tell us that everything is going swimmingly. You know, we've best part doubled our national debt in the space of 5 years of one government, and nobody is addressing this. We have got a very serious problem. We're also, I have to say, I mean, there is a big row today between the BBC and the Conservative Party. And all the BBC ever talk about are the cuts. Well, the truth of it is, whilst public services locally may be being cut, overall, there are no cuts because we're still borrowing nearly £100 billion a year more than we're actually earning. So we're in real trouble, Charles, and what we're doing actually is we're leaving our children and grandchildren a debt mountain to repay that is even worse than we faced in 1945. So that's the first thing. I would like to see honesty. And we are going to have to make some cuts. Of course we are. And I personally believe there are some straightforward, simple and obvious places to start.
That is the meat of his question, Mr. Farage.
Yeah,
what would you do?
What I would do, the first thing I would do, Charles, is to say that of the £11 billion a year that we spend on foreign aid, only £2 billion of it is spent on genuine inoculations or clean water. So I'd cut £9 billion from that because, frankly, it's just being used as an arm of foreign policy.
You're aware of today's Financial Times. You've seen that it's an additional £1 billion. I mean, I should imagine from your days in employment, the FT is probably your Bible, Nigel Farage. So add another billion to the figure now.
They're proposing to add another billion, and there is a debate this morning in the House of Commons on this. So it'd be very interesting to see what the temperature of Parliament is today on this issue.
You'd slash how much of that? 10 gone. 9, 10.
Yes. I mean, 9 to 10 billion would go. And that's a good start, isn't it? You know, I would then say, what on earth are we doing? Putting a net, we could talk gross or net, but putting a net 12 billion a year into the European Union. I mean, I know Mr Van Rompuy, my old mate, who's just retired with a 600 grand payoff, probably thinks that Britain's contributions are wonderful. But, we don't need to pay £12 billion a year in order to have the privilege of buying French champagne or German motor cars. So there's a good place. I would scrap the HS2 project, which is going to cost between 50 and 80 billion sterling, and then have a serious look at a lot of the quangos where people are vastly overpaid and in many cases doing jobs that I think is unnecessary. And what we will do, Charles, in our manifesto, is we will list some of these quangos that we think should be closed down. Now, I'm not pretending that solves all of our problem, but goodness me, it would be a hell of a start.
Let's get a reaction from Charles.
One reaction from me, Nick. I'm an ardent Conservative, and I think George Osborne has done his best. No, we haven't reached our target, and he did say so in his autumn statement. But let's not remember that. Well, let's not forget, for example, that Labour, who were in power for all this time, caused this crash. It was caused in 2008. It was caused under Gordon Brown, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in now.
Well, with respect, Charles, this government, with George Osborne as Chancellor, has increased our debt more than Labour managed in 13 years. It is not going well.
I have to say, for a purpose of a bit of balance, which you don't necessarily get on the BBC, they would say that unemployment is down, growth is up, inflation is down. They point to all these figures, Nigel Farage.
Nick, given that we're borrowing this massive lump of money every year, if growth wasn't up, we'd be in a hell of a mess. I mean, it's simple Keynesian economics, that when things are tough, you borrow money, you prime pump the economy, it leads to growth. The point is that even Mr. Keynes himself didn't think that his recipe was a permanent year-on-year solution. I mean, I shudder to think where we're going to be in 5 years' time, because, Charles, you know, what Osborne's done, he's played the same trick. He said, well, listen, you know, we haven't succeeded this time, but by the end of the next Parliament, we'll be back in balance. Do you know what? I don't believe him.
How much left-wing bias is there? On that subject you touched on briefly, Nigel Farage, how much left-wing bias do you perceive at the BBC?
I have long been very critical of elements of the BBC. I thought when we launched our European election campaign this year in Sheffield, the launch of a campaign that ultimately led to us winning a national election, and I was treated, you know, by the BBC's chief political correspondent, I thought in the most extraordinary way.
What do you mean by that?
Just asking me a series of trivial questions about my wife and the fact she was born in Germany. You know, nothing about the big campaign, nothing about what we intended to do. And I have to say I found it fairly demeaning. And Question Time, which can be a great programme, but it was remarkable. I mean, the night of the Clacton by-election, there was a Question Time on, a live Question Time from Clacton. So Douglas Carswell had won the by-election by a majority of 35%. You know, he got nearly two-thirds of the votes. Question Time managed to produce an audience of 200 in the hall there who were deeply hostile to Ukip. So you have to start asking yourself some questions. Not everything the BBC do is bad, and I'm not suggesting that for a moment. Do we need a public service broadcaster? I would trim its sails pretty massively.
What do you mean by that, Nigel? When you say clearly the licence fee is going to take a hammering then under Ukip?
Oh, the licence fee would take a great big hammering.
Would it vanish?
Ukip. No, I'm happy to have a small amount for the licence fee to keep that original Reithian public service broadcast remit to inform and entertain. That's what it's there to do, and I think it's just grown like Topsy. And did I see this week that there were 140 people working for the BBC who earn more than the Prime Minister? Sorry, something's got to, something's got to give.
We move on to other calls.
We move on to Justin in Kingsbridge.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
I just want to ask, David Cameron said in April that the £11 billion foreign budget was his proudest achievement. Mm-hmm. So the £2 billion top-up to the NHS this week, is that his most embarrassing achievement?
Well, I don't know. The $2 billion thing was extraordinary, wasn't it? It was like a bidding war on the airwaves on Sunday morning. You know, anything you can do, I can do better. And it was $2 billion from the Tories, and it was $2.3 billion from Labour, and then we'll match it and we'll raise you. I mean, look, I think the very fact that Mr Cameron thinks that increasing the foreign aid budget, whilst he's cut the Royal Navy to ribbons, reduced the British Army to the smallest it's been for over 200 years, just as an example, if that really is his proudest achievement, I think it shows you why he is so out of step and out of touch with a lot of traditional Conservative voters. And, you know, he hasn't just done that. He's pushed through gay marriage in this Parliament, despite not having a manifesto commitment to do it. And he's done absolutely everything he can to make sure that every square inch of England's green and pleasant land is covered in wind turbines. So I think, you know, this is why the Conservatives have lost a lot of their key support. It's on policy. And you would have thought that given all of that, Labour would have made hay, and yet Labour have perhaps an even more acute problem, which is that Labour voters look at Ed Miliband and just don't recognise him as being one of them at all. So we've got a large lump of Labour voters and a large lump of Conservative voters in this country who frankly, are looking for a new home.
Thank you for that. Where do we go next?
We go to Laura in Leatherhead. Good morning, Laura.
Hello, good morning. I'm just drawing on the
Oh, Laura, the line broke up. Can you hear me, Laura?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you
Try
hear me?
again, Laura. Nice and loud, if you would.
Okay. Just relating to the conversation about people being turned away from major operations if they're morbidly obese. I wanted to ask, do you feel that those who take risks and make decisions that are likely to have a negative effect on their health, despite being informed and educated as to what we should and shouldn't be doing to our bodies, do they still deserve the same privileges as people that take care of themselves?
Well, I mean, the morbidly obese thing is just simple common sense, isn't it? If you're going under a general anaesthetic, there are a range of risks that come with that. So I would view that as being slightly different. Your question, Laura, really is, if somebody who eats lots of donuts has got a circulation problem, or if somebody who is a heavy drinker or somebody who's a heavy smoker, for argument's sake, gets a disease that could be said to be directly linked to their lifestyle, should we treat them differently? I think the answer has to be no. I think it is a National Health Service. I think it is there for everybody. And ultimately, if you abuse your body, you will just need the medical services a bit earlier. If you live a perfect life, at some point in time, and you might be 95, but at some point in time, you're still going to need the National Health Service or old age care. So I'm not for discriminating on the basis of people's lifestyles.
This is an idea, of course, from the doctors in Devon who want to say, for instance, as people with obesity, they need to lose some weight before they can get the op.
Well, that's sensible. That's sensible. There is always...
Smokers need to cut down on smoking before they get ops.
Yeah, even I did that last year before I had major surgery. So, I didn't drink for a week.
A week?
A week. I mean, that's amazing. And I barely smoked. So, no, I was given that advice. Get yourself into a decent condition before you're going in for major surgeries.
How many do you smoke a day now?
Oh, I don't count things like that. Right, now, very good. Moving on to Michael
I wouldn't even ask the other question. Go on, then. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick Farage.
Hello, sir. Go ahead with your question, if you would, please. Thank you.
Apologies. Sorry, I'm simply calling Nick Farage to ask you a simple question which would require a yes or no. Russell Brand has joined the New Era Estate protest to back up to 93 families who are reported to face eviction before Christmas. What is your opinion on the situation?
I think, in this particular case, I think Russell Brand, and people call him a hypocrite and all sorts of things, and I'm not saying he's my favourite person, but he does have a social conscience. So in this particular case, I'm supportive of what Mr. Brand is talking about. My bigger problem with Russell Brand, and by the way, next Thursday, I'm going to be sitting next to him on the panel of BBC's Question Time, which should be interesting. My big criticism is Russell Brand says it's all awful, democracy's failed, the banks have got too much power, the country's not working, the poor are getting poorer, it's all awful. Yes, Mr. Brand, I agree. It is, much of it is awful, but when he's asked, what is your solution? He says, don't vote. Well, I'm sorry, I find that incredibly negative. If you think things need to be changed, then you've got to use the democratic process. And as yet, I've not really heard anything positive from Mr. Brand on this at all.
Nigel Farage, you talk about your TV appearance next week. Lisa in Hornsey has emailed, what's this I hear about you having a tipple with those posh people on Gogglebox? Will you be doing more reality TV? Is it true you fell over?
I tell you what happened. I was asked...
I sense it is true you fell over.
No, not quite. Oh. I was asked, would I go and do a sort of televised dinner with Stephanie and Dom, who've become incredibly famous.
Yes, they have. They look great fun.
Through Gogglebox. And I found... I get lots of invitations for reality TV, and I say no to all of them. But I thought the idea of
having... asked into the jungle?
Not that one, but
dancing.
But the other show I have, and I just thought,
You've been asked to do Strictly Come Dancing.
Several things I've been asked to do, and I've said no to. But the
Farage Fandango.
So the idea of having dinner with them on a midsummer's evening.
Yeah.
I thought, why not? Let's do it. They wanted to get me to pose sitting on a concrete step with them having a glass of champagne, which I did. My body isn't particularly great at getting down and getting up again with all the back and neck problems I've got. So I got up and missed the top step with a sort of toe.
Right.
And the glass of champagne came out of my hand, and my very light grey trousers were covered in champagne. So, I've no doubt that one or two newspapers before this is broadcast next week will say that I collapsed. But nothing could be further from the truth. And I can report they are every bit as much fun.
Are they? They look great.
Absolutely.
They look great.
Absolutely.
And so your total intake that night?
Oh, I don't know. It wasn't very much.
No?
No, we had a couple of pints and a few glasses of wine. It wasn't silly, I promise you.
One more email before we go back to the calls. Rachel in Bexley. Nigel Farage, if you're enjoying a pint in your local pub or a cup of tea and Claridge's and a woman starts to breastfeed in front of you, how do you feel?
I'm not particularly bothered about it, but I know a lot of people do feel very uncomfortable. And look, this is just a matter of common sense, isn't it?
What is it? What's common in what sense?
Well, I think that given that some people feel very embarrassed by it, it isn't too difficult to breastfeed a baby in a way that's not openly ostentatious.
Was Claridge's wrong to behave in the way it did in asking her to effectively put a napkin over the baby's head? Well, no, to put a napkin over the baby's head. It wasn't effectively.
I mean, frankly, that's up to Claridge's. Is it? Well, I think it should be. And I very much take the view that if you're running an establishment, you should have rules. And you're able, politely.
So just as I'd have to wear a tie, should I decide to have a cup of tea? Yeah. If a woman's told, I'm sorry, if you want to breastfeed, madam, you must go to the ladies' room or whatever.
Well, or perhaps sit in the corner or whatever it might be. I mean, that's up to Claridge's. It's not an issue that I get terribly hung up about, but I know, particularly, Nick, people of the older generation feel awkward and embarrassed by it.
Other calls, where do we go?
OK, we're going to Alyssa in Highgate. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, good morning. With the rise in anti-Semitism, very prevalent in the country at the moment, and with growing hatred from the vile BDS who are so anti-Israel, only based on hate, not truth or fact, what are your views on it, Nigel?
I did briefly pop in on Tuesday night this week to a meeting in Westminster that was the first big event, I think, that's been held for the Ukip Friends of Israel group. And we have a lot of Jewish members in Ukip. In fact, we have senior party officers in Ukip who are Jewish. But I agree with what you're saying. I have detected quite a sharp rise in anti-Semitism, not just in this country, but across the rest of Europe too.
What's fueling this, Mr. Farage?
Well, I think what's fueling it is that there are many more Muslim voices, and some of those Muslim voices are deeply, deeply critical of Israel. In fact, some of them even question the right of Israel to exist as a nation. So it's quite interesting because there aren't actually that many Jews in the country. There's only a few 100,000 Jews.
It's about 250,000.
Yeah, it really isn't very many. I mean, it just shows you what an extraordinary group of people they are, the success they've achieved in, whether it's media or politics
banking,
or anything. I mean, so I think that's the reason is that we've got this counter voice, which is deeply critical, and so I suspect that is part of it, and it is, of course, one of the challenges that we face. That when you have a society that's got a lot more different groups in it, you're going to get these kind of conflicts.
How in tune is the coalition government to this problem, would you say?
Oh, I think they're aware of it, but I just feel I think they're always treading on eggshells. They're always frightened to say something for fear of causing offence to somebody else. So I think there are a lot of people in politics today who would be nervous about speaking up for Judaism and the existence. Doesn't mean we should be uncritical of everything Israel does.
No.
But I think people are...
Well, you have to divorce Israel, from Jewish
absolutely.
people. These are two very separate stories.
No, they are, but they often get conflated.
Yeah.
And that's really the point.
Yeah.
So I feel that we're not being strong enough, perhaps at times, in defending the rights of the Jewish people to have a homeland, because we worry that we'll offend another group of people within the country. That's how I see it. OK, moving on to James in Wimbledon. Good morning.
Hi, Nigel. I'm an Aussie who's been living in London for several years, and I think your immigration policies are dangerously wrong. Why do you pretend that leaving the EU would mean we could let in more people from Australia, New Zealand or India, when UKIP policy would in fact mean cutting immigration from the Commonwealth? As far as I know, net immigration from the Commonwealth was over 60,000 this year. But at Ukip, you have targeted total immigration at 50,000 a year.
Well, the whole point, and I'm pleased you're an Aussie because I'm going to say this. The whole point about the Aussie point system, that's exactly what we would like the UK's immigration policy to be, is that it does not discriminate against where people come from. It seeks quality, and it gives Australia the absolute freedom of choice in terms of numbers and the types of people that come to the country. And we've now found ourselves in a situation where we have a complete open door, James, to nearly 500 million people, and we have no mechanism of checking the numbers and no mechanism of checking what type of people are coming to Britain. And I know this debate has been a very inflamed one, and I've come under massive fire from the establishment for even daring to raise it. But I think if we had an Australian-style point system in this country, immigration would go from number 1 as a political issue down to about number 20.
Okay. I'm just worried that 50,000 and 60,000 doesn't add up.
Well, we operated a policy, James, from 1950 almost to the turn of the century, where we allowed a net migratory flow into Britain of about 30 to 50,000 people a year. And what I'm suggesting is that when immigration ran at those numbers, we didn't have the kind of problems that we've got today. But the whole point about having control is that you can choose. I am not, and I want to emphasise this strongly, against immigration. I think managed, controlled immigration can be a very good thing for this country. But frankly, I think what we've done through a massive oversupply of unskilled labour is we've driven down the living standards of millions of British families. We've opened up the National Health Service to health tourism, on a really very big scale. And I think that's an irresponsible way to manage an immigration policy and a country.
Let's go to a text, if I may. Raphael and Lewis. I think it's important to teach children about sex and safety. I have 2 children myself. I think that over 8 years old is the way to go. Obviously, you tailor it based on the age. Nigel Farage, you made a U-turn earlier in the week on UKIP policy. What does UKIP really think about this? This was you seem to be caught out a little bit on an ITV debate show.
I mean, there's no U-turn on it. Our education spokesman at our conference spoke about a whole raft of things.
You weren't there when this was said?
No, I wasn't. I was out the back trying to get a defector through the curtains.
I can't really argue with that.
And the bit I knew we had a debate about sex education because a couple of cases had come up where 5-year-olds were being given sex education at school.
Yes.
And our feeling was that was wrong and it should be older. And the only question was, what age should it be? And we're saying it should be, well, the party spokesman's speech said it should be over 11. Frankly, whether it's over 11 or whether it's 10, I'm pretty relaxed about it. Should sex education be part of education? Yes. In general, should young people get a broader education than just being pushed to pass assessments? Yes.
So Raphael talks about over 8 is the way to go, so I'm going to take that as being 9. If I held your feet to the proverbial flame, what age are you going to say it should...
let's not split hairs here. Whether it's 9 or 10 or 11, I don't know the answer.
Could it be 8?
I don't know the answer to this. I'm not an educationalist. Our education spokesman thinks 11 is an appropriate age. That's negotiable. We will have to agree a final figure and put it in our manifesto
Might it be
next
8?
spring. I don't know.
What will determine it?
What is suitable and what is appropriate, I suppose.
How do you work that out? How does a party like UKIP decide what would be the right age, whether it's 4, whether it's 11, whether it's 8?
Definitely not by asking me, but by asking people. No, but by asking people who work in the education sector and have expert. I am not going to be the kind of politician that comes on your show or anywhere else and pretends I know the answer to everything, because I don't.
All right. Where do we go, Mr. Farage?
We go to Rollo in Hammersmith.
Sorry, that's my writing. Rob.
It's Rob, is it?
My apologies. Rob, go ahead, young Rob.
Rob, hi.
Good morning, Nigel. Good morning, Nick. Nigel, I was ask you, if you get into number 10 next year, how will you sort out the immigration, unemployment and the health service, please?
Oh, gosh.
How long you got?
So, you're not asking for a lot, Rob. Well, I think the immigration we just dealt with the previous phone call, an Australian-style point system so we can choose the quantity and quality of who comes into this country. Unemployment is linked directly to that because we would reduce the oversupply of unskilled labour that comes to Britain, and I don't buy the argument that all of Britain's youngsters are lazy, feckless and useless. One or two might be, but a lot of them out there that I've met up and down the country are struggling to get work because they face, frankly, pretty unfair competition. The National Health Service has become desperately bureaucratised and complicated, and we are going to propose in our manifesto next year a wholesale slimming down of the National Health Service and more public involvement by giving the public the opportunity to vote for the people that run local hospitals and health boards. You've asked three massive questions there. I've done the best I possibly can.
Rob, a quick response.
Thank you, Nigel, and all the best on that, and I hope you do get in, Nigel, especially the health service, because it's been used and abused for years, especially weekends, Nigel, because I actually work for the health service.
Yeah.
And a number of people coming in trying to get free treatment on the NHS is ridiculous.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they had GPs to go to, really, wouldn't it? I mean, it's interesting that Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, admitted himself that he's taken children with very minor ailments to A&E because there isn't a doctor's surgery open or somewhere to go to. And that, I think, should change, because it would take a bit of pressure off A&E. And, by the way, anyone that works in A&E, they are heroes and heroines. I wouldn't want to do it.
No, and good luck to you for the work you do, Rob. Thank you for
particularly on a Saturday night, when they're dragged in fighting, and it really wouldn't be much fun.
No, it wouldn't.
Matthew in Canterbury, good morning.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Farage. Good morning, Nick.
Hello, sir.
Nigel, can you assure me and your listeners that you're not prepared to privatise or sell off any parts of the NHS? No,
it's too late. Labour's done it already. It was the Labour Party that bought in the PFI deals, if you remember, back in the late 1990s. They borrowed from private money, private equity mostly, 50 billion sterling to help build new hospitals. But unfortunately, the payback terms, it's going to cost us 300 billion to pay back that borrowing. And it was done by Brown to keep the spending off the public balance sheet. That was the reasoning behind it. It's a rotten deal. It's leaving a lot of hospitals in a terrible mess with their repayments. They also, of course, Matthew, outsourced a lot of the basic functions of a hospital, like cleaning contracts and food contracts and all sorts of things like that. So a lot of private money has got itself very rich out of the National Health Service in the last 15 years. We've had a big debate about this in Ukip. Countries like France, countries like Holland, do use very much more of an insurance-based system, and we've debated that at length, and our conclusion is no. Let's keep the National Health Service as it is, but if we streamline it, if we make it more efficient, if we get these PFI contracts off our back, perhaps we'll start getting better value for money, and that is our settled policy.
And a quick reaction, Matthew?
Yes, well, on that, I think you've got my vote. And for all the listeners out there, let's give Ukip a chance.
There's a song there.
Thank you very much, Matthew. God,
we moved that.
It's almost like a setup.
He got that in, didn't he? Where do we go, Mr. Farage?
Top man. We go to Ben in Orpington. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. The sort of question I wanted to put across to you was, there's hard-working, working-class, people like myself that are paying 40% tax, and it's almost like a negative at the moment in the country where hard work seems to be penalised. What are we getting back? They're taking 40% tax. If you want to buy a big house, you're getting taxed on that again. What's the incentive for us to strive and work hard, without being penalised so much? What do we get back from this?
Well, you're right, Ben, and of course one of the questions that a lot of people ask themselves is, why are the two of us going to work, getting up early every morning, paying for expensive childcare, when the people over the street don't get up early and don't work, and because of the benefit system, frankly, are much worse off than we are? And that is a question that is asked. I think that we just have to incentivise people through the tax system to make work pay. And we're going to fight, hard, as we've done for some years now, for no tax on minimum wage. That's number one. And our second tax policy, Ben, is there are now 6 million people, and it sounds like you're one of them, who are paying what was for 25 years top rate tax of 40%. Because what the Chancellor has done is not to increase the threshold. So you've now got, nurses, policemen who are paying that 40p rate, and we would like to see quite a radical shift up to about £55,000 a year income before you start paying a tax at 40%. It's not a magic wand, and I understand your basic question, but I think tax incentives would at least help. Would that help you, Ben?
Of course, certainly. My greater sort of concern is obviously the next generation. You've got a generation that's, typically lazy at the moment. And I look at it from their point of view as I listen to LBC or watch the news, and I think, you know what, if I go out and I leave early in the morning at 6 and I go and work blood and sweat to earn some money, all the government wants to do is take half my money. If I strive to buy a big house, they want to tax me on that, not just from the stamp duty, but they want to tax me with council tax. Why? I'm not even going to bother.
Yes,
and I think that message is a chronic disease that can affect the mentality of the youth. And
then if you go and fill the car up, you've just given them a load more tax, and if you go and have a glass of something somewhere, that's a load more tax, and if you're crazy enough to pay £9.30 for a packet of cigarettes, you've just given them a load more tax. So we are very, very heavily taxed indeed.
Finish with an email and one question from me. The emailer first, Alan, would UKIP do anything about the pitiful amount of state pension levels?
Not right at the moment. We've got to create more wealth, and I do understand that our state pension is lower than some other European countries. That is absolutely true. There is a new universal credit system coming in. There is thought going on. The state pension has been improved, to be honest, over the last couple of years. But for the moment, I could cheaply say, don't give the money to Europe, give it all to the pensioners, and that would sound marvellous. But actually, the other side of this equation that hasn't been discussed at all this week is wealth creation. And I think we create wealth by lifting the burdens of regulation off the backs of Britain's small and medium-sized businesses. So at the moment, no.
Nigel Farage, I find you a very likeable fella, but apparently it's necessary to spend £60,000 so that you have some form of protection and driver. Why so high?
Isn't it interesting? If you look at all the other leaders of political parties, they, of course, all have the state provide them with, the means to get around and with security. The state doesn't provide UKIP with anything.
Should it?
Well, I've written to them, they've said no, so I'll just have to accept that for now, won't I? So we have to fund...
But you think you should be on the same level as, say, Ed Miliband?
Well, I'm not saying Ed Miliband, but any former Northern Ireland secretary, or, they've all got protection. Look, I'm not having an argument over it. The fact is, we don't get help. Do I need a security? Yes. And do I need to be driven around from place to place? I think I probably do, Nick. I came up here early this morning. I'm off to Swansea in a minute to give a speech. I think I do actually, so there is a team. There are two guys who are with me and take me around the place. And if that's been interpreted by one national newspaper as somehow I'm now living high on the hog in this luxury 4x4 car, all I would say to the journalists that write stuff like that is come and spend a week with me. You'll be half dead by the end of it.
Will you be sure you're well to come and see us again in a couple of weeks' time? Nigel Farage appearing here on Phone Farage Exclusive. Miss Farage, thank you, here on LBC, where news is next.
UKIP leader Nigel Farage has told LBC a luxury London hotel which asked a breastfeeding mother to cover up had the right to do so. Speaking